How's it going, everybody? Good evening. This is going to be posted iPhone, just like every lecture should have been getting posted recently. I know sometimes we make some mistakes, but for the most part, every lecture should be up and ready for you whenever you need it, at least after the first couple days. All right. We're going to give it just a couple minutes, just going to give everybody the chance to hop on in. Hopefully, too many people aren't too focused on the World Series and trying to find Anthem the stands. I could understand if they are, though. All right. How's everybody's evening going so far? No worries, iPhone. We will see you another time. Enjoy dinner. Thanks for stopping in. Good to hear, Errol. Good to hear. I see Husky in here. Welcome in, Husky. Good to see you as always. Not much, man. Picked up some. Eli Lilly. What's going on there? Oh, super interesting reaction to earnings there. I have been good, Husky. Honestly, it's been a pretty simple last couple weeks for me. Really been keeping it straightforward, just a couple share trades as we head into the elections. Not trying to put on a whole bunch of risk, really. So just keeping it easy. Nothing too crazy. I'm in a little bit of Amazon right now. Sold all the MU I had and all the CRWD that I had. So CRWD, can't type. I had a couple new things, which we'll probably talk about a little bit today. I won't get too far into it, but I really like to look at a firm. I missed it today, though, unfortunately, and this one might be gone for good. UPST is one that I'm also been kind of interested in as well. But we'll talk about all that. Anyway, that's the long answer to your question there. Let me send out one more message letting everybody know that we're going to get started, and we'll get going for tonight. All right. Couple minutes after the hour, so I want to just get right into it. Welcome into the class, everybody. Great to see you all again. As the title of the lecture is shown, tonight is really going to be more of a longer term charting / technical analysis focused lecture. Really going to focus on some market leaders, some sectors and themes to watch out for into the end of the year. Some things to pay attention to based on potential different outcomes in the presidential election. And that's probably where we'll start, considering that's probably the most pressing and maybe interesting topic at this point in time is different places to potentially park your money as a result of the presidential election. So with that said, let's get right into it. As always, again, I mentioned in this lecture, we'd be talking about things that I've covered over the last real 6 months. So we'll definitely be using our general guideline in terms of long-term charting, where we start at the higher time frames and begin to zoom in. So just a quick high level. Obviously, there's 2 months left of the year. We have November and December. And in between now and the end of the year, we have a lot that is still to come, including the rest of earnings season that is definitely kicking off. Pretty much a mixed bag between semis, big tech with a nice report out of Google yesterday, and a bit of a mixed bag out of Microsoft today. So a lot between now and the end of the year, including that. And also we have a presidential election, which I'm sure everybody is aware of and doesn't need to be reminded of. And I think the presidential election is really something for us to look forward to in terms of new emerging themes in the market. I'm 100% certain that everybody has their own opinions on who should be president, and that's totally fine. But depending on who does become the president, there's going to be different themes that begin to emerge in the market, and we can start to see some of those emerging already. So obviously there's kind of two different ideologies. I can't even say that word, so I'm not even going to try to. Anyway, definitely two different, I'll say, policy perspectives coming in from both the candidates. And as a result, some sectors will experience a significant amount of buying or selling, depending on who becomes the president. And I want to start off with one of probably the easiest patterns to recognize, which is one in, I'll say, legal weed, which obviously would benefit from a Kamala win. And I just want to make it clear, this isn't meant to be me predicting anything. I'm not taking anybody's side in this lecture. So hopefully everybody can look past their own preferences and think objectively about the marketplace for the next couple minutes. But one that I have been tracking is CGC, which is a legal marijuana name. A lot of these legal marijuana companies are frankly pretty badly run. So this is one that I definitely be paying attention to for some short-term momentum if Kamala does win the election. A couple reasons behind that. You take a look at the weekly chart. This thing is effectively at all-time lows and really can't go much lower. I mean, obviously it could go to zero, but it is pretty beat up. In terms of support, we got a lot right below, right around this point of control, around 4.7-ish, where price really stalled out most recently. And if you guys remember from our last lecture on the volume profile, which was a long time ago, I think we might refresh it here soon. But for this volume profile, we got a lot of significant support right around this area. Just cleaning up the volume there a little bit on the bottom. And definitely we can see as of last week, definitely some unusual amounts of volume pouring into this name. And this isn't the only name in the sector. This is just the one that came up on my scans. But in terms of a Kamala win, this is definitely going to be one to be paying attention to, considering her platform has talked about, generally being favorable to marijuana, potentially legalizing it on a federal level, which obviously would benefit these legal marijuana names. So a bit more of a fundamental reason to be paying attention to this name. But regardless, if I was to enter it, zooming into the daily a bit, the level that I was previously watching was a hold of this $5.30 area with a potential gap fill up to this $6.11 area, and then even on a more significant move up to the 7.2 spot. Now we got that failed breakout above that 5.3 earlier this week, now coming back into the moving averages. So it's not something that I'm necessarily interested in buying the dip on. However, still something that I'm paying attention to and monitoring, right? Again, this is going to be a really theme-based trade. So nothing that I'm necessarily interested in getting in the long term, but mostly something that I'd be interested in for a more kind of shorter term momentum trade. But with that said, right, we have some technicals that align a bit with that. Pretty strong support here on the weekly and these moving averages beginning to flip here on the daily to the positive side. So this is one thing that I'm monitoring on a Kamala win. Another one to be paying attention to is clean energy. So things like solar. Probably the easiest way to track this is going to be TAN for the solar ETF. This one's also pretty beat up. A lot of the solar companies have really struggled recently in terms of market performance. And this is at a real interesting spot on the weekly. And I could even clean this up a bit just to go through this systematically here. Didn't mean to open that. So going through this on the weekly a bit, definitely some amount of demand around these pivots. We have these lows that we set recently, what might even be considered some kind of triple bottom here. Right, I mean, this is full-blown weekly lows. We could even zoom out a bit more and see if we visited this area recently. Okay, so we're right around these like pre-COVID levels here. So definitely in terms of price, we're at an area of value here. Then zooming into the daily, for the most part, this thing has been doing absolutely nothing exciting. Been stuck in some kind of consolidation. Maybe you could draw a downtrend that looks something like that. I wouldn't be too concerned with that. However, again, similar to that CGC trade, starting to just get some recent momentum here as we get closer and closer to the election. So this is going to be one to watch for some momentum again on a Kamala win. In terms of a longer term investment, it's not something that I'm necessarily interested in at this point. However, this sector I think is generally a bit more diverse and strong than the legal marijuana industry. Like Norman mentioned, there's some more reasonable names. You have Run, which obviously has been performing pretty poorly recently, but definitely can trend. I think NEE, Nexair Energy, is a bit more of a stronger one. So this is in a similar realm. I think they do a bit more than just solar though, which is why they have experienced a bit more strength. So in terms of a solar name to be paying attention to, it would probably be this one over most of the others, considering that this one is I'll say, a bit stronger than the rest. And just going through, I clearly haven't charted this name out in a while. Let's just zoom out a bit and try and get some levels on this one to be monitoring. Just to recap, though, really these are the two main themes that I'd be personally paying attention to on a win from Kamala. Mostly that legal weed and solar are kind of the most important names that I'd be considering there. Okay, so it looks like we got some kind of pivot right around here. Probably mark that off. And then, as always, going to mark that weekly point of control and get it to be nice and precise, 74.17. And we'll label that a weekly point of control. All right. Cool. Those are kind of the two main themes that I'm tracking, though, on a Kamala victory. There's definitely more to be mindful of. I'm sure you could get a little bit deeper into the nitty gritty, too, and really find some different ideas. But for the most part, that's what I'm looking into in terms of a level to be paying attention to. It looks like we're pretty much right in an important spot here at this prior pivot. This is a bit of a messy chart, though. Anyway, moving on to kind of the other side of the coin. If we came into a scenario where we got a Trump victory, I think the two main sectors that I'd be watching are crypto names and just the crypto coins in general, and also your oil names. And again, right, the things that I'm mentioning aren't themes that you need to have any specific knowledge on the marketplace in order to deduce, right? This is pretty kind of, I'll say, basic political knowledge based on the platform these candidates are running on. So Trump obviously has advocated for some kind of increased, or I'll say decreased, regulations around oil drilling, including fracking, which will obviously benefit some of our oil production names, some of our kind of names that are earlier in the pipeline, and also potentially even some of our producers of gas and other crude oil derivative names. And then secondly, our crypto names. Trump has made it pretty clear that he's wanting to be a bit more favorable on that side of the coin. So some names to be paying attention to are going to be, in my opinion, the strongest names in crypto, which is really Coinbase and MicroStrategy are really the two names to be paying attention to. A lot of the miners just don't really trade like they used to, especially now that we have these Bitcoin ETFs like your iBit. Let's see, what is it? BitO. And there's the Bitcoin one. BitO hasn't even been moving that nicely. But iBit, I think, is the most popular one at this point in time, which is effectively a straight Bitcoin ETF. So these are going to be the things that I'd be paying attention to on a Trump win. Your iBit. In terms of levels to be watching out for, we're right at the highs here, right around this 42. Obviously, a break of this all-time high on some significant volume is going to be a spot to be paying attention to. Pretty clearly, this name has broken out a trend, right? I mean, there's no other way to describe it, right? And this is even a name to watch out just for short-term momentum here. This name is pretty clearly strong, right? We have this rising volume as we break trend. Nice gap that we left behind here. Moving average trending positively here. So, I mean, this is really the level to beat these prior all-time highs. So really any move above the 42s on iBit for sure is one to be paying attention to, especially if we start to get some signs that maybe Trump would be winning. And really, what day is the election? November 6th. As soon as November 7th is when we should start to really expect some of these themes begin to play out. Is the election November 6th or is it November 7th? I don't even know. But anyway, day after the election is when you should really start on November 5th. Nice. Okay. I have no idea what I'm talking about. Thank you, Gail. Anyway, day after that, so November 6th is really going to be when you're going to want to start paying attention for these themes to be unraveling. It hopefully will be pretty clear who the winner is. Hopefully it's not too close of a contested election, because that's going to probably cause a headwind for the entire market. That's one thing to watch out for too, in terms of a longer term perspective, is if this election does draw out for whatever reason, if it's a close race, if it's a contested race, whatever it might be, the market doesn't like uncertainty. So the closer we get to a decisive election, the better the market will like it. And that's another kind of overarching theme to watch out for. We should expect to see an overall kind of sigh of relief coming out of buyers in the marketplace and just market participants in general if we get a pretty quick and concise election result. So anyway, that's my abbreviated thoughts on kind of, I think, the most important theme or event, I'll say, that the market is going to be impacted by in the short term. You guys have any questions on that before I start to just get into the indices, talk about long-term levels on there, and then start to get into some of our current market leaders and start talking about some longer-term charting there. And then we can get into your requests too. The intent isn't just for me to talk about the things that I want to the whole time. Any questions on what we covered so far? I know we went through it pretty quick. CLS. Nice, Norman. We can talk about that later. Any questions or comments before we keep it going? All right. Let's start moving on to the indices then. I think I kind of want to pull all of them up at the same time. So hopefully this looks clean on everybody's devices. But if not, feel free to let me know and I will stop doing this. But I think this is going to be the best way to compare everything. So I want to pull up SPY, QQQ, and IWM, the Russell, just to get a nice comparison of everything here. So let me load all the same study up just so I can feel good about everything. And let's zoom out to the weekly here. Zoom into some more recent price action. It's always fun trying to get everything aligned. Okay, IWM is going to be kind of the hardest one to do on this smaller format, but we'll roll with it. Okay, so a couple things to note, and also really quick before I continue on, is everybody able to see this all okay? If not, let me know and we'll just do one at a time, but I thought there'd be some value here in kind of comparing everything. Husky can, he's got that big monitor. Cool. I will assume since there's nobody urgently complaining that everybody seems to be happy with what they're seeing right now. So let me just go to a drawing set that's clean really quick, just so it's not too cluttered on everything. Cool. Okay, so definitely a couple things to note. We have QQQ, which is pretty clearly starting to contract in both price and volume here, which is a pretty telltale sign that we have a significant move incoming. SPY, not as much on the weekly, right? We don't have as much basing here. This is definitely still a pretty active trend. And IWM, a bit of a similar story, right? Pretty clear kind of basing action here, and also this nice contraction in volume. Generally speaking, when we see this sort of volume and price contraction type pattern in an uptrend, typically this resolves to higher prices. Now, with that said, we do have a lot of events that could very easily change the trajectory of the market in the short term. Like I mentioned, if the election is contested and drawn out for the next 4 months, there's a very good chance that the overall market indices are not big fans of that and start to move lower. If I don't know, for some reason, the rest of earnings seasons goes horribly. We get some terrible reports. That would also be a pretty red flag. And I think the reason behind that, and one thing for us to note, at least out of earnings, and this is a bit of a sidebar, is that a lot of the headwinds in the marketplace have really subsided. So the narrative of kind of inflation or recessionary fears, that sort of thing, those have really subsided at this point and have kind of become non-issues. The thing that's going to be concerning investors most for the foreseeable future is earnings growth. So they're going to want to see strong performance out of our companies as part of these indices quarter over quarter, as well as they're going to be looking for that strong guidance as well. And so far out of this earnings season, like I mentioned earlier, it's been a bit of a mixed bag, which I think has definitely helped with some of the stagnation in terms of the price action that we've been seeing, kind of that whipsaw action out of the Qs, $5 up, $5 down, that sort of thing. In the grand scheme of things, it's nothing, but overall, definitely a pretty mixed reaction to earnings. So SPY overall, in terms of kind of price action here, this thing is well above its prior highs that it set in 2022 and definitely been on an absolutely ripper trend. I mean, this has been completely unstoppable. This is definitely not at a place where I'd be considering some kind of entry for the long term, considering that it is an active trend. It isn't necessarily in some kind of nice tight base. But in terms of levels we're paying attention to, this area based on the weekly looks to be important, right? This 564 spot. That's really going to be the most important level. And I'll even zoom into the daily a bit just to see if we can add some more clarity there. So from a longer term perspective, 563 definitely is going to be an important one. We had multiple prior highs here and kind of consolidated up against this spot. Now that we have some more detail and resolution coming in from the daily, we can make a bit more conclusions here. This swing high here, 575 area, definitely is going to be very important. And we can also see some kind of consolidation here on the shorter term on the daily, maybe some kind of flag. All in all, right, there isn't any red flags from a technical standpoint for further downside, right? This trend still looks constructive for continued upside. I do like it. If we did get a close above this daily downtrend, I would definitely be interested in getting long, maybe up to the 586 area. 590 obviously is going to be a target to be paying attention to, and then ultimately your 600, right? Can't ignore that. But in the short term, right, there's really nothing going on. Market is really just anticipating earnings in an election, right? And I think one thing to note is when the market has such significant events upcoming and in progress, it's not very common to see massive reactions, right? You have a big election that could really change the trajectory of things over the next few years, either direction. So definitely really important, at least for market participants, to kind of wait and see what's going to happen. So that's kind of my take on the SPY. I'd say not the strongest longer term setup, but in the shorter term, right, from a daily perspective, definitely a constructive uptrend here. We're holding above the most important pivots, which really matters. Nice positive trend out of the EMA. So no big red flags, definitely still a bullish trend overall. If we started to break below this 575 here, that would be a real good reason to start to have some concerns for maybe some short-term downside, potentially even all the way to this 564 or 565 area. But for now, no reason to be too concerned about that. As always, we react to the price, not to our thoughts and feelings. And for now, price is pretty much constructive. Moving on to the Qs, a bit of a different perspective here. Pretty clear base forming in this kind of range, right up against this $500 area. This definitely isn't in as nearly as active of a trend as SPY is, right? Where SPY is well above its prior highs. QQQ is still struggling to break above that. So right now, this 497 to 500 area is really going to be the most important place for the Qs to get through. And we can see this a bit more clearly on the daily here, likely. Just zoom in a bit. So pretty nice uptrend that we could probably draw from these lows on both the Qs and the SPY. Definitely nice to see this continue to hold. This is going to be something that we'll probably want to continue monitoring for closes above this area. SPY getting a bit close there, but just something to be mindful of, right? Pretty significant uptrend from these lows that we set back in late July. Definitely bulls will want to continue to see that hold. In terms of the Qs, now that we're on the daily, we could probably refine this level a bit. Definitely this 503 is the place to be, right? This swing high on the daily, we got to get above this for further upside. Definitely maybe some sketchiness, right? I think my biggest concern here on the Qs is that it took us about, I don't know, let's say 20 days to fall from this prior high. And it's taken us triple that time to get as close as we are to it today. So that's a bit of a sign, right? It definitely was showing that the last time we were at this level, bears were much stronger than bulls now are. Again, not the biggest red flag in the world, but something to be mindful of, right? This has been a long and drawn out process to get back to this level. And some maybe kind of contraction in price here. Some people might consider this a rising wedge. Not something that I would give too much weight to yet, but again, just kind of things to be mindful of, right? It definitely seems like price action is slowing down as we approach these highs. And if we don't see some nice reports out of, I know Amazon's reporting tomorrow. I don't know who else is. But if we don't see some kind of blowout from Amazon or maybe some renewed positive reaction to Microsoft in the morning, it'll be difficult to be incredibly bullish on the Qs as we're so close to that 503 spot. This is going to be a really important place for price to make it above in order to get some kind of renewed bullish sentiment in the marketplace. Oh, Amazon and Apple. Okay, I missed Apple. Yeah, so obviously two real big names, Apple being pretty much the bellwether of the tech sector. So if we don't see two, I mean, it's going to need to be two pretty positive reports. If we get that, I mean, I don't see why we wouldn't probably just blow right through this 403 or 503 and have some renewed bullish sentiment to continue to look for some longs in the market. But for now, definitely a bit of a concern with the tech sector as a whole as we're just starting to really struggle below this 503. It's not something that really excites me in terms of new long positions until we either make it above this 503 area or maybe start to come back down to some of these lower pivots. You know, I think the next level to beat is really this 485 where we set this prior low. Below that, you can start to look out for this 477 area. Again, that next swing low. Those are really the pivots to be monitoring in the short term. Again, though, right, while these may be red flags to be watching out for maybe some bearish price action, as of now, there's nothing to be too concerned about, right? We haven't got any significant seller volume stepping in. We still have some earnings upcoming, so we can't be too set on one outcome, but it'll definitely be interesting to see how the market opens up on Friday. That could definitely be very telling. If we get some less than lackluster reports out of Amazon and Apple, that would be definitely a concern for the tech sector as a whole. All right. Last one, and yes, Armando can definitely check Disney. Just probably won't until a little bit later, but definitely can take a look at that and any other requests that you guys might have. All right, last thing is IWM, and I'm just going to minimize these a bit so we can see IWM a bit more clearly. Now we've kind of laid the framework for both SPY and the Qs, so can maybe minimize that a bit. IWM is definitely very interesting to me. It's one of the most interesting setups on the overall market that I currently am seeing. Obviously, massive volume shelf that we're currently consolidating on. Generally speaking, this is going to be more bullish than bearish as we're holding above this volume shelf at this point in time and holding it as support. And very clearly, we're consolidating right against this 225 area with some nice declining volume. This one obviously has been doing pretty much nothing. It is effectively flat since the beginning of 2021. So it is done effectively zero over the last 3 years. So obviously, it has been lagging the rest of the market. I think IWM as a whole isn't a very good way to trade these small cap names that it represents. I think mostly this is just a gauge on sentiment in the market as a whole. We have to remember that IWM holds 2,000 companies, and probably more than 1,000 of them are frankly just low performers and not very good names to be involved in very generally. So me personally, if I'm going to trade small caps, I'm going to be looking for those names that stand out among the rest, which I'll talk about some of those right after this. And I think that's probably where most of the setups are in the short term. I want to try and stay away from tech since we just finished earnings on 2 of them today and are also going into earnings on another 2 of them tomorrow. So I want to try and stay away from that just a little bit, at least in terms of longer term analysis, and kind of wait for some couple days after that just to let price settle down a bit. But as for IWM, broke out of this big base that we sat in for about 2 years, right, from 2022 all the way to 24, and then back in this really at the bottom of this range that we sat in for all of 2021, everybody's most loved or hated range, depending on how you looked at it. At this point, right, pretty clear consolidation up against this 225 spot, maybe a little bit of an uptrend that we could draw into this area as well to begin monitoring, something like that. Zooming in on the daily, or I guess one last thing to note, all the moving averages are positive. We have the 20 simple or 50 simple moving above the 200 weekly moving average. Everything's in an uptrend, so definitely nice, strong, bullish price action. Zooming in on the daily here, we've kind of just been surfing this 50 simple moving average, so not too much momentum here. Just continuing to come back down and revisit that area. Redrawing this trend, though, this is definitely a spot of interest if we make it back to this area. As of now, it's pretty clear that this 225 is the place to be, or place to break. We got this little kind of failed breakout above 225, but no massive selling volume that came with it, so not the worst sign ever. And really, IWM is just, again, another name that's not doing much right now. If I was going to get involved in this, it'd be over 225. And if we do get that break above 225, that's going to be a real strong sign for just risk on sentiment in the market in general. And if you weren't already involved in small cap names, this would be the time to get involved in some names, some of the strongest names, once IWM breaks above that 225. But from a long-term perspective, similar to SPY and the Qs, nothing bearish about this chart, right? Absolutely nothing bearish about this. This is by all means a strong uptrend coming into a nice consolidation, sitting in this base. And if I haven't said it before, typically the longer a name consolidates on the higher time frame, the bigger and more significant of a breakout we get. And if any of you remember kind of the ideas from the stage analysis lecture, we've covered that stage analysis graph a couple times. But one kind of fun saying that is said sometimes is the bigger the base, the higher in space, which I don't think I've ever said that out loud, which feels incredibly, I feel ashamed to be saying that out loud, but it is true. The longer name consolidates, very generally, typically the stronger and more significant of a move you get out of that base. So IWM and a lot of small caps in general have been really doing nothing for the last multiple years. And the longer we see those consolidations draw out, it's really starting to get more reasonable to expect a significant move once we break out of those consolidation bases. Got a question from Errol. Before you forget, is the volume bar on IWM standard or customized with so many colors? Yeah. So this is a script that I have. It just highlights volume that is 3 standard deviations above the 200 simple moving volume average, which IWM has really been all over the place recently. But these yellow bars are volume that are just essentially, or days where we just had far above average volume. That's really all that represents. And I could probably grab the link for that script really quick and send it across to you if you're interested. I'm already copy pasting it, so I will just put it in the chat. There you go. So that's the script that I run. It's pretty simple. It really is just calculating the 200 simple volume moving average and then 3 standard deviations above that. Just something that I like to use to really make it clear when a name is experiencing significantly above average volume. I mean, obviously you noticed it. It's pretty clear. Yeah, I like it. All right. That is really the end of it for our index perspective. And just to kind of recap and make this into a bit of a learning lesson, just to explain my thought process. The way that I broke down each one of these indices was reasonably systematic. And while I didn't speak out every step of my thought process, what I'm doing is starting on the weekly time frame, identifying the trend and identifying any key pivots, right? From there, we zoom in, we can adjust our key levels to be maybe a bit more specific based on daily price action. We again confirm the daily trend and ensure that that is also in the same direction as that daily or weekly longer term trend. And from there, we can start to really get some kind of thesis, right? Generally speaking, in the market, you should always speak in if-then statements. So you should never be speaking in certainties necessarily. It's speaking in the language of more, if something hits this 575 area, I should expect that to be support. And if I see some buyer volume show up there, then I will take an entry on longs. Or if we get a daily close above this trend, then I will purchase shares and set my price target to be 586. The last thing that I want to highlight is the selection of these pivots. And this is something that I've covered in a lot of lectures before, maybe in different ways, maybe not. But the reason these pivots are so significant is for a couple of reasons, right? The first one, that's the most obvious, is very clearly in history, institutions or big money buyers and sellers cared about these levels, right? And that could be for a multitude of different reasons. We don't know why institutions were originally interested in trading at these given areas. However, what we do know now is that very clearly at this 564 area, institutions stepped in and began selling here and here. So we know that this level matters to the people with the most money in the marketplace, right? Which, generally speaking, the people with the most money in the marketplace are the most influential. And for some reason, they know that this is the place to be buying and selling a given equity, right? And as traders, all we can really do is ride the ebbs and flows and price action that big money traders create, right? At the end of the day, we're small fish in the ocean. And all we can really do is identify what big money is doing and do our best to follow along. Which is why we need to be mindful of these pivots, right? Because they matter, not only because this is where big money is trading, but also these are important pivots in the trend, right? As trend following traders, a lot of people are going to be paying attention to these higher highs, higher lows. And when we break these levels to the upside or downside, that could be an entry trigger for a significant amount of the marketplace, right? So for example, some investors may no longer get longs once price breaks below this 575, as now we are no longer in an uptrend on the daily, right? Because we'd be setting a lower low. And similarly, short traders may no longer be interested in shorting if we get a daily close above 585, because now we are definitely still in a confirmed uptrend. So those are just a couple hypothetical examples. It's a long-winded way of me saying pivots are incredibly important. And typically the way that I personally select them is by looking at areas where price pivoted or reversed in the past, as these are going to be the most significant areas to be paying attention to in the future and typically serve to be the strongest areas of support and resistance. That was a really long statement, and I feel like this lecture has been a lot of me talking, but hopefully you guys are finding value in it, and I'll check in just a bit. Last thing that I wanted to mention is the use of the volume profile, which wasn't as clear with these specific examples, so I'll just switch it back to one chart really quick. The volume profile is super, super fundamental to the way that I like to analyze charts. Again, I've given lectures on it before, and I think I'll give another lecture on it next week just to refresh everybody and maybe talk about it in a different way. But the volume profile here, or volume by price, or market profile, whatever you want to call it, represents the amount of shares traded at a given level, which is just another way of representing support and resistance. So you could see right around this area here, where we marked this pivot out, we had a big volume shelf here. Right around this area, which is not perfectly lining up, we also had a pretty massive volume shelf as well. So these areas definitely act as significant spots of support and resistance, and why I find it so important to pay attention to these. All right, that was a lot of me talking. How is everybody feeling? I didn't mean for this just to be an only charting lecture, and wanted to make sure I'm conveying my thought process as well. What are you guys' thoughts? Yeah, any comments, questions, concerns? What is the shaded indicator on the left of your charts? Yeah, so that is the volume profile. That's what I was saying. It essentially represents the amount of shares traded at a given price. Cool. Any other questions? That was a great question. And I think, Gail, just for your awareness, I think I should give a lecture on this into next week. Cool. All right. Well, if we have no questions, I want to just review a couple specific charts that have been standing out to me recently. So into the next 2 months of the year, I really want to be doing my best to identify kind of the most significant themes and emerging trends in the market. And one that I'm starting to notice pop up more and more is the concept of kind of like consumerized debt, I think is my best way of describing it, which another way of thinking about it is taking advantage of people who want short-term loans. And while I don't necessarily support taking advantage of people, I trade charts, right? So me getting long or purchasing shares on something isn't necessarily an endorsement of the company, but that's unfortunately the reality of things. And two names that have been kind of popping up on some scans that I've been making are Upstart, UPST, and Affirm, which in my opinion, both companies share a similar business model. Those of you who are familiar with Affirm, it's essentially the buy now, pay later model where you can purchase some $1,000 thing and then pay over 12 months for, some amount of money, like $80 or something. And I think there's also interest too. So Affirm is one, and then Upstart is in a similar realm for me, where they provide like short-term loans. I think pretty much like you can just get a loan from them pretty easily. Kind of the problem with both these companies in terms of how it treats consumers, which this isn't a lecture on ethics, but just to make my point clear. I mean, they definitely take advantage of people in terms of significant interest rates, and I've heard stories about it before, but unfortunately, that's, I guess, the reality of their business, and we trade charts, so we have to trade the charts. With that said, a couple interesting things. Both of these names are at real unique spots here. Upstart is one that has been popping up just because of the significant amount of volume that's been coming through on this name recently. It's got earnings coming up in early November. So I'm really watching this name to see if it wants to move a bit more into that report. In terms of the overall chart, this name looks pretty terrible, right? I mean, it's super beat down. If we zoom all the way out, it is all the way back to its IPO levels. So this thing has made a full and complete round trip. This thing used to be a market leader and is now, or was now, an absolute zero. But to me, this definitely looks like a name that is in consolidation, right? It is forming this base here off these lows. You could maybe even draw some kind of trend or wedge or something like that. I don't want to force it. But one important thing for me to note here is that it has broken above this prior high, also set a higher low, and is definitely starting to look like a name that is emerging into another strong uptrend. So we have the EMA slipping positive here on the weekly. We have the 50 simple moving average turning up to the upside. And this is a really common set of features for a name that is emerging from a longer term base, right? This is two features that we really want to see. We want to see these short-term EMAs move above the longer term simple moving averages. We want to see these longer term simple moving average begin to start increasing their slope to the upside. So all in all, this is starting to look like a name that is emerging from a longer term base. And similarly, Upstart looks very similar to me. It's a name that's absolutely beat down, was a massive market leader earlier in 2021, and is now starting to emerge once again. It has effectively done nothing over the past couple months, but it is now starting to pop up again, similarly on high volume, right? So we got this high volume coming through right now. We previously had some really significant volume as we came into these highs. And all throughout this trend here, we didn't get any significant sell volume, which means to me that bulls are still in control here. So this is really what I'm monitoring here. Let's just talk a little bit about how I would structure a trade on both of these names, because obviously that's the most important thing, right? It's great to talk about names, but if we don't know how to trade them, it doesn't matter for anybody. So zooming in a bit here on Affirm. Like I mentioned, this is a name that I was kind of getting interested in, looking for an entry as soon as today, but I did not actually end up taking it, which that is my own fault and nobody else's. With that said, the level that I'm really most fascinated in is the hold of this daily point of control, which is right around this 41 spot. As of now, we've obviously made a pretty significant break above that, and I want to just zoom into this recent price action. You can all see how I have these levels before, right? These are really just these prior swing highs. So that's where these levels are coming from. Zooming in here, though, just checking out the volume patterns as of recent, every single, well, not this one, but definitely some real strong bullish volume patterns here, and only one significant day of selling, which this was still a gap up. So it's got something going for it. Breaking this kind of short-term downtrend here on the daily, and then also starting to creep back above this volume shelf here. So you can see top of this volume shelf and prior pivot is right around this 45 buck area to me, which could definitely be another opportunity for an entry. So I want to probably let this name cool down after today a little bit. It's a bit extended for me, but a move back to the 45s is one that I would watch for an entry, but I'd probably be most excited for a move all the way back down to this 43 area. Which as of tomorrow would probably be a retest of these EMAs. But this is definitely starting to look like a name that wants to get moving into its earnings report. It's got earnings in a couple weeks at November 7th, so we still got some time here. But again, right, an emerging theme here, right? It's a small cap name. Well, not really a small cap name. I think at this point it's probably a couple $1 billion company. But to me, I consider this one a small cap name, right? It's fits in with the company or within the group of companies that I think could be referred to as small caps or just less notable companies. Anyway, long-winded explanation for me. However, really the reason I'm focusing on this name at this point is it's starting to exhibit some relative strength too. We got a nice big 5.5% green day on increasing volume. You look at the rest of the sector, right? IWM, it didn't do much today. You look at big tech, didn't do much today. So just a good name for us to begin paying attention to, right? So this is a name that I want to start watching more closely into the end of the year. And similarly with Upstart, right? Zooming in on the daily here, this one looks a bit different. So it's actually made it above this significant prior pivot here, right around this 50 spot, and it's just been consolidating. So this is a really interesting one for us to begin paying attention to. If we take a look, maybe some kind of flag forming here on the daily. And also, right, we have this nice hold of this $50 area, and zooming in just a bit more, pretty nice volume patterns as well, right? On these big green days, we're getting this nice, significant above average volume, which is definitely something that we want to be seeing if we are looking to get long on this name. So for me on this one, I would be interested in grabbing it on another test of that 50 area if we get it, with probably just a stop on a daily close below at this point, maybe even a stop below this 48.66 area. And if we don't get that test, a daily close above this trend would also be a completely valid entry. Zooming out just back again, in terms of price targets, there's really not much resistance on this one until it gets to the 70s, which makes it even more interesting for me. Once we get that daily close above this trend and get above this pivot, there is not much stopping this name to go all the way to the 73 area, which makes it even more fascinating for me. So this is kind of two names that have been showing some relative strength recently that have been holding up really well compared to the rest of the market. So yeah, two names, an emerging theme that I've been tracking. We talked a little bit more about emerging sectors over the last couple lectures, so hopefully you're familiar with the concept as a whole. And these are two names I'll be tracking into the end of the year. Just to give a quick other kind of thing that I'm watching, Definitely very interested in Amazon. We got a kind of a breakout today. If we gapped up and barely closed above this trend. Amazon, another real interesting one that I'm watching. Definitely nice consolidation right at this previous high, consolidating above this volume shelf too. This one really looks like it wants to rip, but it has earnings tomorrow. So that could be changed. But I would definitely be surprised if it dropped on earnings. I mean, the technical setup is definitely there, but anything can happen over earnings. So I can't get too set over it. Anyway, those are the names that I'm watching in terms of longer term setups for now. Um, any questions on that before we start to take a look at something that you guys are interested in? All right, we'll kick it off. Feel free to go ahead and throw some names that you guys are interested in the chat. I know we got a mention of Disney earlier, so let's take a look here. Um, Disney is one that's been a bit harder for me just because it really hasn't done anything of significance in a long time. It's effectively just still in a range, as far as I'm concerned, between this 86 and 120 area. It's a big range and it's certainly tradable, but it's just not something that's really interesting me too much as of now. So, zooming in a bit, not much going on in the weekly here. The daily, I guess, there's some positive action in the short term. If I was going to do anything about it in terms of getting long, probably would just get long above this 97 area. Nice big volume gap for us above here. So it gives us some room to get long there, or at least room for a nice price target all the way up to the hundreds, 101s. But anyway, that's really what I'm paying attention to on Disney if I was to trade it. It's just mostly a weak name though, and not something that fascinates me too much. We got earnings coming up soon, which maybe could provide some kind of character change. I think as we continue throughout earnings season, the names to watch are names that gap significantly in one direction on earnings. If you just study the history on names that gap significantly on earnings, even on Disney, right? This gap up one direction. After we got this gap up, price continued moving 15% higher. Big gap down on earnings. After this big gap down, price continued moving. Oops. Price continued moving 20% lower. So those gaps on earnings are definitely one of the best indications of momentum that you could possibly have in the market. So that's what I'd be watching for on this earnings season. Reddit is one, definitely had a nice big move on earnings today. Wow, this thing actually ended up going 40%. That's insane. Wow. I did not realize it ended up that big. That is really impressive. But anyway, this is not necessarily a name to get long on tomorrow, but definitely a name to continue monitoring, right? If we get that nice consolidation or retrace into the moving average, it's probably one to consider getting long on. Same thing with Tesla, right? Nice big earnings gap higher. When we see these earnings gaps, what that really signifies is that people who were, or I'll say analysts and people whose job it is to predict how a company will do on earnings, were dead wrong, right? They tell their firms, hey, this is what we should be doing. This is how we should be positioning for the stock. And when we get these big reactions on earnings, all that means is that, hey, we got it wrong. And that's a big character change in a stock. When people realize, hey, we got this wrong and we need to be buyers now, or we need to be sellers now. Anyway, that's a quick aside on earnings gappers. And also just general gappers, like somebody mentioned SMCI. This is one that is, for me, an absolute zero. They got dropped today by their auditing firm because they were just that unreliable and also have had pretty significant issues with financial accounting recently. So it's just a name to stay away from, if you ask me. I think there's better investments in the marketplace. This isn't something that I'm looking to buy the dip on. If you're really interested in the semiconductor or AI trade, just trade NVIDIA. It's the biggest name. It's the strongest name. Just trade NVIDIA, right? Stay away from those weak names at this point. SMCI is maybe potentially close to being a fully fraudulent company. So you got to be careful with that. All right. And it says Meta, and then Norbert, I'll take a look from your names that you've been posting. I don't think Meta had a super positive reaction to earnings today. Yeah, so a bit of a negative reaction on their report. All in all, though, still definitely a strong name. I'd be interested to see how they close into tomorrow. As a longer term trader, it's hard for me. Well, not only a longer term trader, but from a longer term mindset, at least, it's hard for me to say, give some kind of long term thesis here. However, as a potential day trader from a shorter term lens, if Meta does come down to this 560 area tomorrow during the day, probably would be a place to consider getting long there, at least for a day trade. So that'd be what I'd be most interested in, is any move down to this 561 area, probably a decent place to get long. Oh, you own shares. Okay. Well, you're probably not most satisfied by this report. But in terms of the long-term perspective, right, this report isn't doing too much damage. Let's see. I mean, still that earnings growth. Oh, massive beat on earnings. It must have been a guidance thing. Wow. Yeah, big beat on earnings. I haven't read the report, so I'm not exactly familiar with what the situation here is. But anyway, Meta as a long-term shareholder, really no concerns here. I'd maybe start to sweat a little bit if we lost this 561 area, but still, hopefully you at least trimmed up into the 600 area or has trimmed some of your position. But with that said, I would be even more concerned as a longer term shareholder if we lost this 552 area or 542 area. But outside of that, nothing really too big to sweat on this report. It's only down $20. That's not too big of a deal for Meta. And we'll see how it closes tomorrow. That's what's most important. Yeah, you're welcome. Again, important to see how it closes, right? If it loses that 561, maybe a bit of a reason to start sweating. If it loses that 542, definitely a reason to start sweating and maybe considering selling to reposition later. But if you're really just a long-term holder of Meta, I don't think this is one to really freak out about personally. But I haven't read the report. All right, let's look at Hood. Yeah, Hood was an interesting one. They actually had a pretty soft report. I think they missed estimates this quarter, which was kind of a surprise. Yeah, they did miss estimates. This is actually one that I am still interested in longer term. I think this is a really great platform in general. I love Robinhood personally. I think it's a great brokerage, and I think it's definitely climbing the ranks in terms of overall usability and features and that sort of thing. In general, I'd be looking for a retest of this 24 area, which isn't very clear from the weekly. So let's just chart it out here. Yeah, so right around that 24 area. That'd be the spot that I'm interested in. And after hours, it's at about 24.50. That'd be the spot that I'd be paying attention to it. If it comes back down there, definitely be interested in maybe grabbing some shares for the longer term. Obviously would be a full position, right? You don't necessarily want to just blindly buy the dip. But definitely would be an interesting place to start exploring some shares. I haven't read the report overall. I'm assuming the business is still intact. They probably just guided softer than expected. And they also missed on the top line, which that's never exciting for investors. But I think they have some really good long-term prospects. I mean, the chart from a weekly standpoint still looks excellent, even with the move down to the 24, right? This name is super, super extended from the EMAs. So a move down to this 24 area isn't actually the worst thing ever. Really right now, that would just be a retest of these weekly EMAs, which as a long-term investor shouldn't really be much of a concern to most people. Anyway, I think Hood is still pretty intact. We'll see how it closes tomorrow, though. All right, let's look at some of Norvin. CLS. Yeah, I mean, longer term, probably not the best place for an entry here. Super extended from the EMAs, but generally looks strong. I mean, yeah, I'd probably, as a shorter term trader, Norvin, probably would get long about this 70 area. SMR, yeah, I think the longer term trade on this one has definitely come and gone after the break of these highs right around the 16. Still definitely looks pretty intact, but yeah, not something that I'm super, super interested at the present moment, Norvin. But I mean, doesn't look like a short necessarily, just not the best place to get along. BKNG, whoa, what the hell is this? I have no idea what this is, but why is this name $4,000 per share? Yeah, I mean, Norman, honestly, I mean, you had a great trade right here on the break of these highs, 4,400 area. Yeah, I wouldn't enter today. If I was going to enter, it'd probably be on any retest of this 4,400, but yeah, it's a weird one. All right, Mr. Andy, we got a long message here. So name you're looking for on a gap is NVO, earnings on the 6th. LOY, take Wegovy, Ozempic, which is MBO. If they hit, whichever. Yeah, definitely a great one to be considering if you're reacting to it, and also a significant amount of momentum on it today. I wonder, was that okay? So that was just a similar reaction to LOY's earnings. Okay. Yeah, I mean, overall, this thing closed green when Eli Lilly closed red. Let's take a look at this from a longer term perspective. Okay, so longer term, the overall on the weekly, the trend is still obviously up, but we are below some of the more important moving averages. So we're below our EMAs, we're below our 50 simple, which isn't necessarily the worst thing ever if we're looking for a longer term trade. This 105 level seems to be kind of important here. Let's just zoom in a bit on the daily, maybe get a bit more detail here. Yeah, so that 105 area is definitely an interesting level. And even this, okay, right where it landed today, even that prior gap seems to be important. It's definitely got some room to the upside. This thing's beaten down for sure. Let's see here. A lot of gaps too on this thing. I mean, if you drew a trend like that, it did break trend today. This definitely looks like, from a longer term perspective, this looks like a candle that is trying to put in a bottom. We have massive volume and also rising volume into this bar. I would really not be surprised if, yeah, I mean, if this one gapped higher on earnings, I wouldn't really be super shocked. Again, anything can happen on earnings. So if this gaps on earnings, I'm not going to be the one to say, "Oh, I told you so, I knew it." It's not reality, but yeah, I mean, Mr. Andy, I think I'm in agreement with you. I wouldn't be surprised to see this gap on earnings. I know nothing about this company fundamentally. It seems like you've done a bit more research than most other people in here. That wasn't an insult. That was just that's me saying that most of the people don't know what's going on there. Anyway, I'm rambling. This looks good, I think. This definitely looks like a longer term bottom. It's putting in here at this 108. Nice to see this high volume. And the way that I like to study these sorts of bottoms is that just look back and when you see, look back for a similar bottom or top to this, where you see a bull bar closing near its high on high volume, right? Let's see if we can even find something like this. The last time that we can really see some kind of bottom like this is here and maybe here. So I'll just zoom in on these two examples. This is back in 2022. We got a decent bull bar after a gap down closing near its high. Same thing here, right? Both of these bars put in a longer term bottom. Same thing here, right? Same thing here. See if we find any other decent examples. Same thing here, right? Elevated volume, bull bar closing near its high. That was longer term bottom. Same thing here. Almost same thing here, not quite, but still close. So, I mean, I would definitely not be surprised if we don't see this 109, at least until the earnings report. I would be very surprised if we came back down to test that level. I think it looks good long. If it didn't have earnings, I would probably consider being a share buyer if I knew a bit more about this company. But since it does, I probably don't know enough to get myself involved. But it looks good. This is a cool find, Mr. MD. All right, everybody. Well, that's really going to do it for us tonight. As always, appreciate you guys' attendance. Appreciate the questions. Those are great. And I think next week we'll probably do a more detailed look into the volume profile, talk about how to use it. Yeah, that's everything. Again, hope you guys have a great rest of your night. Thanks again for your time. And I will see you guys all in the next one. Adios, everybody. Enjoy yourselves.